Welcome, everyone. I call the November 13th, 2024 Landmark Preservation Meeting to order. Before we move on to agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our hybrid meeting format. The City of Bothell is providing the option to attend this meeting either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those participating via Zoom, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. This time is for comments on issues not on tonight's agenda. Please limit these comments to 3 minutes. Please note that the City of Bothell does not tolerate verbal harassment. Please remember this during your comments. Public comment will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Those wishing to comment via Zoom were asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today. People wishing to submit written comments were also asked to submit those comments by 3 p.m. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. Those in attendance may make comments that have been asked to indicate their desire to comment on the sign-in sheets. The Imagine Bothell Notice, City website, and tonight's agenda all provide information to the public for providing comments. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they're referencing so everyone can follow along. At this point, we will take a moment to take roll of the board members by position number. Please unmute your microphone and say here when I call your name. Board Member Thomas.
Here.
Board Member Babajinov.
Here.
Myself, I am here. Board Member Arlu Jothi. Not here. Board Member Burgess. Not here. Board Member Salazar. And Board Member Sampi.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you. In addition, the following city staff are in attendance: Nick Schmeck, Planner, City of Bothell, and Adam Alsabrook, Willamette Cultural Resource Associates. Before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. Mute your microphone when not speaking. Please state your name before speaking. And for those making presentations, please pause periodically to ask if there are any questions. For board members, at the appropriate time, I will be calling on each member by position number, asking if they wish to speak or ask a question. I will also be doing this when it is time to vote. If you wish to speak, please indicate this by raising your hand. I will call on you as I see you. This will help the problem of 2 people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask to speak, make a motion or second a motion, or participate in debate. Please mute your microphone when not speaking. If there are any objections, please raise your hand. See none. First item on the agenda is non-agenda public comment. If there are any members of the public here, they may now speak about items that are not on this agenda for tonight. Do we have any people wishing to speak?
As it looks, there are no in-person attendees, and staff did not receive any emails or phone calls of the community who would like to speak today. So none.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the approval of minutes from our October 9th, 2024 regular meeting. Minutes from our October 9th, 2024 regular meeting were included in the packet for review. Would a board member like to make a motion to approve them? If so, please indicate by raising your hand. Board Member Sampi.
I move to approve the minutes from October 9, 2024, as written.
Second.
Excellent. Board Member Sampi moves to approve the minutes from October 9, 2024, and Board Member Thomas seconds. If anyone wishes to discuss, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will now go to a vote. Board Member Thomas.
Aye.
Board Member Babajinov.
Aye.
Myself, aye, and Board Member Sampi.
Aye.
Passes 4-0. Excellent. So next on the agenda will now be new business, as there is no old business. Briefing on the park at the Bothell Landing improvement projects. Before we hear the applicant's presentation about this project, we will first hear from Nick Schmeck, planner with the City of Bothell, who will give some guidelines and instructions to the board about this briefing.
Thank you so much, Nick Schmeck, City Bothell staff. I'm just going to read this verbatim, and then I'll add some context as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chair, board members. As you are aware, Bothell Municipal Code Chapter 22.28 does not include specific procedures for the board hearing briefings on proposed projects that will eventually come before the board. The goal of this briefing is for the applicant to present their proposed plans to the board and receive constructive feedback from the board as to the appropriateness of their proposal before they apply for any C of A's, Certificate of Appropriatenesses, to change a property on the Bothell Register of Historic Landmarks. Board members, whenever possible, please refer to the specific sections of the Bothell Municipal Code and also the Secretary of the Interior Standards for rehabilitation when making your comments and recommendations to the applicant. Staff would also like to recognize we do believe that you guys obviously are a voice of our community and have opinions on the overarching project at the park at Bothell Landing, and we also want to give you this platform and the space to speak on just general thoughts that the consulting team here and other city staff who will introduce themselves here shortly can take into consideration as they continue designing this really cool project. I just want to say from community development standpoint, we're really excited for this project to move forward. We're excited for this team to come present to this board, the Landmark Board, and we just appreciate your patience with this team and looking forward to hearing any recommendations. But lastly, I'd just like to end with keeping on track to and being specific about the constructive criticism about the future C of A's coming in front of this board, specifically to the resources that we're going to be talking about and their modifications. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick, for those comments. We will now hear the briefing on the Park at Bothell Landing Improvements Project. A copy of the briefing packet for the Park at Bothell Landing Improvements Project was included on pages 9 through 25 of the agenda packet for tonight's meeting. Applicant's team, please introduce yourself to the board by giving your names and your role in this proposed project, and then proceed with your presentation. Board members, please hold all questions until the end of the presentation. So you may now proceed with your introductions and your presentation.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Board. My name is Aaron Milner. I'm the Planning and Development Manager for the City of Bothell. So I represent the city as a project manager for the Park at Bothell Landing Conceptual Design Project. I'm here with our consultant team from Site Workshop and SHKS Architects. So I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, thanks for having us. I'm Sean Kelly with SHKS Architects, project architect and project manager, focusing solely on the building aspects of the redesign of this park.
And I'm Ryan Storkman with Site Workshop, project manager for the project.
And hello, Benita Sidhu with Site Workshop, principal with the office. We are the prime consultant on the design of the park.
So really briefly, I do want to provide you just a really high level kind of summary of the project. So the Park at Bothell Landing, as you know, is located in our downtown corridor. It is part of the downtown revitalization plan, the city's downtown revitalization plan. So the rerouting of State Route 522 a number of years ago, around 2010 or so, provided this opportunity for an expanded and improved park. So we're here this evening to talk to you about the conceptual design project to date, some of the community feedback we've heard so far, and specifically that feedback as it relates to the historical buildings at the Park at Bothell Landing. So I'll turn it over to Ryan and Benita to get us going.
It's totally mobile.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to share just an introduction on about the project and then the context for the discussion around the buildings. Sean will focus on the buildings when we get to that. But I wanted to just start with this overview of the project. As you can see, it started way back in 2010 when a master plan was created, and it preserved that core with the historic buildings and the amphitheater. And our work today has been really an extension of that. And of course, there's been a lot of development between then and now with the realignment of SR 522, the daylighting the creek, and a lot of planning efforts and a new bridge over the Sammamish River. So that brings us to about a year ago when we started the public engagement process, and we've hosted three public engagement events and 2 online surveys, and then we've had a number of meetings with the Parks Board and City Council, and we'll kind of share the outcomes of that in a moment. But just to step back, if we could move to the next slide, to step back and look a little bit at the site. We have the park, which extends down into that green belt to the southwest, but the prime focus of this project is the redevelopment of the area outlined in the solid pink line, and the reasons for that edge will become clear on the next slide. We have the solid blue polygons there are wetlands, and then that dashed blue line on the left-hand side of the page is Horse Creek. So that creates kind of a boundary of wetlands and critical areas to the west, which we're minimizing impact to. And then we have, of course, the ordinary high water mark of the Sammamish River, which is that blue line, and then the buffer, which is set back from that, and then the shoreline jurisdiction, which you can't really read, but it is further set back. And so most of the park, all but just a sliver of that grassy lawn, the dog park area, are within the shoreline jurisdiction, just for context. Next slide, thank you. So we're really here to talk about the historic buildings, the 4 historic buildings in that orange zone there. And we just want to note that those were all moved here, as you probably know. They were moved to this location, and so that kind of affects how we're thinking about where they sit on the site. I think I've sort of talked through the other site constraints, but we have that steep vegetated edge along the river, and then the sort of open lawn areas and the community space between these historic buildings and the river. So that will sort of that siting we'll talk about in just a moment. So we had a series of public engagement events, and we came up with 3 concepts initially: activity focus, event focus, and nature focus. And ultimately, we put together a sort of hybrid of the 3 plans. But out of all of the public process and public engagement, history and preserving the historic buildings became a real focus, and it became clear that that is a big interest of the public. But also expanding the history to include Native American and other histories that are not represented by the current buildings at Bothell Landing. That also became an important piece of the feedback. So in this plan that we'll share, this compiled plan, we'll talk a little bit about how we're thinking about that now. So in this preferred concept plan, we'll start by noting that we have moved one of the historic buildings, and we can talk more about that in detail, but the goal there is to kind of open up and expand that lawn space as part of the amphitheater. One of the other things we heard from the public was that the amphitheater and these public events are a really important part of the park at Bothell Landing, but that they would like to see more of that and possibly larger events, so expanding the lawn would be beneficial. But the Beckstrom cabin, which sits right at the near that number 30, prevents the expansion there. Other important aspects of this plan are a sort of central water feature and plaza, and then the skate and pump track areas to the northeast, and of course parking in the northwest, and inclusive playground, and kayak launch, and some restored beaches in the southwest corners of the site. This is an axonometric kind of perspective, just showing some of the gather, splash, ride, stroll, listen, learn, play, and launch. So a lot of the activities that we're proposing are already done here in some form, but we're making more space for better access to these activities. So circling back to some of the things that we've heard in from the public around the historic buildings, there's I think a real passion for preserving the buildings, but also for possibly expanding access to the existing facilities, and then thinking about new facilities, like specifically Native American representation and art, and their place here at this site and in this area. And then also a big part of this, the feedback, as I mentioned, has been around expanded gathering space, and thinking about how to maximize this park as a community gathering place through events and activities and family gatherings, smaller events too.
I would just add, I think maybe many of you know that the Lighthouse has been used in the past for different types of events, and during the pandemic, those activities slowed down, and there's a lot of interest in bringing that back. That's what we've been hearing.
For years, it was a lot of plastic.
Yeah.
Everything from exercise to general meetings, there was even weddings.
So we just wanted to summarize from a sort of site approach or site wide perspective, the historic building improvements. So accessibility improvements to all the buildings is very important. And Sean will speak to that more specifically in a moment. And then there's a school bell that has not been on site for some time, but had been historically, and we'd like to make a place for that. And then possibly a historic garden walk, or some more context and more sort of historic landscape to frame these buildings in a more sort of sited way. And then new interpretive exhibits, including Native American representation, as I spoke about earlier. And then relocating the Beckstrom cabin, and this has a couple of benefits. As I mentioned, the potential to expand that green space and expand that stage, or that amphitheater space. And here you can see that the stage we're proposing that a new stage be built and shifted to the west, and sort of expand both the stage area and potentially the audience area, and by shifting the Beckstrom cabin over, we could make that happen. And then the Lighthouse renovation for expanded public and city use, as Vanita spoke to just a moment ago, it has a long history of public and family events, and I'm going to let Aaron speak to some of the ideas that have been floated about how it could be used in other ways to support city goals. So I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, just to provide you some context for how that building's been used, it's been, Vanita and Victoria, you mentioned some of the uses with the Lighthouse. So since it's been relocated to the park at Bothell Landing, it actually originally served as a community senior center. So more recently, it's been an event meeting space, supported a lot of our recreation activities and programming, and then also it's served as office space for our parks administrative staff, actually all of our administrative staff for quite some time as well. So as far as the events and meeting space, this is a rentable facility. It's an affordable rentable facility. There's been all types of celebrations at the Lytle House, from birthday parties to celebrations of life to weddings to anniversaries to just general meetings. And as far as recreation, we've offered cooking classes in the past. We've offered performing arts classes, dance classes, STEM classes, just to name a few. And then the office space piece of it has offered like a really cool connection, not only with the community, but with the recreation programs that we support and serve. So, as was mentioned, in 2020, we had scaled back our Parks and recreation activity, our recreation program significantly. And through this process of the Bothell Landing engagement process, we've heard from our community, and we've heard this from our community in other avenues as well, through the comp plan and other avenues, that there is this very strong interest in bringing back, and not only bringing back, but expanding recreation in our community. And we see the Lytle House as a real opportunity to provide those services to the community and what they desire. So.
Thanks, Aaron. So now we'll go building by building in a discussion format, just to kind of clue you into what our thinking is, at least currently. I will say that we haven't gone through a full-fledged accessibility assessment of each one of these buildings, though it is clear in some cases that ramps will need to be replaced to meet ADA. This is sort of a short list of things we know need to be done. There could potentially be some more later, but we will check in with you at that time to sort of, brief you with more updates. So starting with the Hannon House, of course, this is on the Bothell Historic Register, and it's on the Washington Historical Register as well. Our proposed upgrade to this building includes a ramp to meet ADA, so removal of that existing ramp, and also the addition of handrails, which currently are not accessible. We'll likely need to modify the ADA or the threshold into the building at the existing doorway to meet ADA. And as far as the width of that door too, that still needs to be checked. There's also a number of other deferred maintenance items that I'm sure the city is aware of that we'd likely address at that time when we're altering this building. But the goal here is really a light touch. We know how much the public loves and cherishes all of these buildings, so we're really trying to do right by each one and really meet the letter of the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic rehabilitation. And moving on to the next building.
Do you want us to pause between buildings or no?
Okay. So Bothell's First Schoolhouse, similarly, right now, those in a wheelchair it's inaccessible to actually get into the building. When we're altering the streetscape just outside, I think we have a unique opportunity to bring people in who otherwise wouldn't be able to see what was inside the first schoolhouse. So adding a ramp, of course, with handrails as well here seems to be a good idea. Also, we'd need to modify the door threshold so it's accessible, and then various deferred maintenance will also take place here, but again, this will be a light touch. And for the Beckstrom cabin, so this is a very unique circumstance. Of course, all these buildings, as mentioned, have been brought to the site. Ryan had mentioned, relocating this outside of the shoreline buffer. The real question is, how do you go about doing that in a responsible way? And so in this case, we're wanting to sort of align it with the grid of the other buildings to really create the image of the sort of unified historic district, even though we wouldn't really call it a historic district, quote unquote, but it is, really is a gallery of historic buildings from Bothell's past. So in doing that, we'd likely propose new detailing at the base condition, which right here you see there's this, more contemporary concrete foundation, which likely, wasn't the case back when it was originally constructed. We would want that to, have a relationship with the ground that's a little more historic to what had been original, all the while making it waterproof and durable. So we'd like to visibly conceal any new concrete foundations to maintain that historic appearance. We'd also add an ADA compliant ramp. We know that doorway is actually a little thin to comply with ADA, so the question too is would those in wheelchair be able to kind of view to the interior from the exterior, or do we want to alter it such that those in a wheelchair can access the interior? I think that'd be a bit more heavy-handed alteration that is not in the spirit of this building, though that's up for debate. So I welcome you to ask that question or challenge it. And so I think that's likely the level of alteration we would take on the Beckstrom cabin. And now the Lytle House. So this one has a more unique history, I guess. It's been altered quite a bit since it was originally brought here. Originally constructed in 1896, Dr. Lytle, after his passing, this building was donated to the site and brought here in the 70s. Since then, it was added onto in 1984 for a care facility for the elderly, and then subsequently being used as a community building. So the question as to what level of alteration is really required or desired really is it comes down to what the city's needs are, what the community's needs are, and really what the spirit of this building originally was and could be yet again if we were to modify this in a responsible way in line with the Secretary of the Interior standards. So we have three options we've studied so far. The first one, which is we're calling the Lytle TI, so tenant improvement. It's really just a minimal alteration to the interior in order to bring as many city offices back to this building as possible while still providing community gathering space. It's pretty much at its limit of what it can provide for either of those uses at this time. So that being said, it doesn't really check all of the boxes as far as I understand the city's needs to be. So if we were looking at a long-term plan for this building, there may be some other options that would benefit the city overall. So the two other options, the Lytle lift and the Lytle add, those are a greater level of alteration. So in both options, the goal is really to bring the original building back to its original form. So it really has a similar footprint to the other buildings on site because obviously these came from a residential lot. In their 1984 edition, which is very historical, it keeps with the kind of detailing of what the original structure had, although it's not original. Our plan would be to remove that 1984 edition and bring it back to what its original appearance was. In the Lytle lift option, which we can go to the next slide for a bit more graphical representation. Of course, this is very rudimentary here. You can kind of get a sense for what the original looked like in this image. We'd bring this up to the second story. We'd basically lift up the building and demo the original or the actually reconstructed foundation in order to bring that first floor down to the main level. So there's more of a seamless entry between the plaza level and the new addition, which would be on the first floor. Our goal here would to be sort of a seamless interior-exterior experience in a more pavilion-like fashion. And really lifting this building is intended to tell the story of these buildings being brought to site. This park, I think, has a tale to tell, whether that be native histories or whether that be, these beautiful old buildings that got brought to site. I think it's important we show that these aren't necessarily original to the site, but they're really a showcase. So in this option, of course, we'd have publicly oriented program on the first level. Accessible restrooms, an updated kitchen. We'd have a Lula lift that's able to bring less able-bodied people up to the second floor, where we'd have a lobby and then a deck that overlooks the amphitheater down below. And then on the second floor, in the majority of the space would be public offices and just for any city use that they deem fit. Okay, so then going on to the Lytle ad. So this one is essentially keeping the Lytle house where it was, kind of altering that front plaza space so it's a little more inviting, maybe creating a seat step condition rather than that guardrail condition that seems somewhat separated from the public space it serves. And then adding a reasonably sized addition just in back of it. In this case, it's shown as 2 stories. Of course, the land use code reads in this area it's not definite about how tall a building should be. It's really a conversation about what's right in relation to these other buildings on site. So we reasonably wouldn't go higher than 2 stories. We try to keep this as discreet as possible. And by pushing this back from that exterior plaza you see in sort of the bottom left, that I think defers more to the original Lytle house as well. So both in the material treatment of this ad and it's sort of pushing back, we'd likely want to let the Lytle house be the Lytle house and the addition be the addition, have a different material, have them really be unique in their own rights. Yet they'd be connected by some gasket that allows them to share the first floor for public use. We haven't really studied it in depth as far as like where the city offices might go in this scheme, or where the layout for all the restrooms and the like would be. I think really this is just an external study to see how this building might fit on site, and it's really a conversation starter with you all. Thank you. And I guess at this point we'll open it up to questions or comments. Again, please let us know what your thoughts are, good, bad, or otherwise. It just helps us in moving towards the C of A in the future.
Would it be helpful to go one by one? Or do you guys just want to rapid fire? It's up to you. It's your board.
We can go one by one. Yes, do we have any questions?
Who wants to go first?
Oh. You can-
Get Alex, maybe give him an opportunity if he's got questions.
Board Member Babajanoff, do you have any questions?
I don't at the moment.
Thank you. I don't know, Board Member Thomas, do you want to go ahead if you have any?
Okay. If I run over my time, let me know. I'm especially interested. One, I want to thank you. I mean, I think the project has the community excited. I think the people that have seen it and visited some of the pop-ups and things, the presentations, have been overall, I think, a high level of excitement. I am especially personally excited about the inclusion here in the expansion of history to include Native American history. I personally would like to see our Native community engaged in those ideas. The greatest opportunities that I'm aware of for that would be engagement of the students and families in the North Shore Native American Education Program, which I think meets at Lake Washington, but I've met with some of the people there. I think they have a new director, at least since I engaged them some time ago. Of course, the University of Washington has a population of Native American students who might be interested in participating or actively encouraging. Also, the Burke Museum. I was very excited, had the opportunity to go down there for a regional meeting to look at how they have worked with Native tribes. And I don't know what the opportunities currently there are, but those are resources that I'm at least aware of. I would personally like to see something like a Native longhouse there, where which is not really appropriate in this area. There was never a longhouse in the Bothell area. There's evidence in Kenmore. This was a slough area or swamp, just a drainage area from Lake Sammamish. Since it's been dredged and everything turned into a river pretty much. I know, I think early on records show it took 3 days to transfer, to go from basically one end of the lake into Lake Samami. So it was not an easy journey. But Native people use this area for summer camps primarily. But, with Native American concurrence in the area, then maybe the support to build a longhouse consistent with what did occur in the area, that would be a meeting place, a place where current Native artists could work. The education program could have activities and events there that would be more open to the community. I think they currently have them in the gymnasium at Lake Washington, which is not too accessible to the rest of the community, or not as visible. So I guess that would be my comments on that. As far as the Little House, I guess there seems to be have been a need created to have the Parks and Recreation Department administrative staff be there, which I question in terms of long term. I'm not saying it's totally inappropriate, but it just, I don't know, I'm kind of surprised by that emphasis in that use of space there. I also, because of the alterations to the Little House over the years in the 80s and that, I question whether the utility maybe of even retaining that space and facility. That's just, I have to say, that's just my initial gut reaction. I'll probably need to process that a little bit more, but in terms of that, I guess I'll quit there.
So yeah, for questions, I guess we're kind of doing questions and comments. I guess we'll do it at the same time now. This might be a silly question, but the alteration options, I'm assuming that at a later meeting we'll kind of recommend what we want to do, which option we would look at.
I mean, to some extent, if we could narrow down, like if there was a strong feeling that one of these options was not going to be supported, we'd love to hear that, because that, I mean, if we need to develop options in more detail to be able to give useful feedback, I understand that. But if there is a feeling that, this option just doesn't seem viable for getting approval, that's something we hope to get an opinion on.
Staff would just like to mention that, the park board, the park department for City of Bothell, and the consultants are trying to balance a multitude of community board wants, the city's needs in general, as you've heard through the presentation. At the end of the day, they're soliciting your feedback to narrow that down a little bit, but still to balance the other needs and the other requirements. And once again, they're going to be meeting the code of Title 22, and that certificate of appropriateness and those modifications will meet the requirements of the Secretary of Interior and our code. But I think what you're hearing from the consultants today is they don't want to bring a non-starter to you guys. They want to narrow it down. Obviously, I would say respectfully, you're not going to get all of your hopes and dreams most likely. But they're trying their absolute best. If you can imagine trying to balance all of the interests, it's nearly impossible. But I feel like, as you've heard today, the emphasis on maintaining what's there is one of their number one focuses, and I'm hoping you're hearing that. Thank you.
No, for sure. Thank you. Yeah. I think you did great work with it. Just that was my question. I'm happy with the answer, so I appreciate that. I have more comments. It's not necessarily related to historic preservation, though, but can I make them anyways? One thing that I thought was really cool in the packet is that people that moved to Bothell were drawn to Bothell for our buildings. I thought that was a really cool comment. Before I was on this board, I wouldn't have thought that. So I think that was really, thank you for putting it on there, because that was really neat to me. Also the comment, the need for more Native American history and more recognition of that. I think that should be high on our list. It seems like it is, so I'm happy with that. ADA requirements are super important to me. I'm thinking, because when I was at Bothell High School, when I was in, I helped with a peer tutoring class, and it was to work with disabled folks, and I was thinking how cool of a field trip it would be to go to the buildings, and then they can experience that. And to be able to get in and out comfortably. I think that's really important to me. And it seems important to all of you too, so I appreciate that. I also think it's cool that the Lytle House has been used for events. That's not something I knew before. I knew we rent out our parks for events sometimes, but I didn't know about the Lytle House. So I think that's a great idea. I'm happy that we did that, and I look forward to us doing that again. The splash pad or the water feature, I think that's super cool. I think that
Way overdue.
yeah, I think we need that. So I'm really excited about that. I also like the skate park. I don't think there's enough things in Bothell for middle school age kids to do. When I was in middle school, I'd usually go to Linwood or a different community, and I think it's easier also for the parents to drive the kids to to go downtown Bothell and to live in Bothell, or they can just walk too. I'm kind of getting wordy now, and I apologize for that. Another thing, real quick, is I feel like the land is being used, which I think is great. I know we have a big the parking space over here. I like for parking, we need it. But at the same time, it's just kind of, I don't know. I like the land being used for activities and people. And I think that's kind of it. So I appreciate that. Board Member Stumpy, if you have any questions or comments.
Yes. You're on my list. Actually, first one is, have they finished the mitigation in the area that's being used as a parking lot?
I know that's an ongoing project.
Forever project?
Forever. We're always trying to improve our environment. Maybe Aaron can provide some more.
Yeah, they're currently underway right now, the remediation process. So the gravel lot area, this kind of eastern corner of the park, there'll be probably 2028 or so before that's fully.
That's a better date than I've heard more in the last 10 years, but I totally understand. I mean, that's a significant remediation and ongoing project. So that was my first question, because it appears we're providing more parking or is that the same parking that we have now on the west side? It looked like it was a little bit more.
The current parking lot is actually closer to the river, so we're, if you're talking about the one that's nearest the play area, so the new parking lot will be pulled back closer to the state route.
Okay.
We are going to be required to do water quality, stormwater improvements, and the gravel area where the remediation is happening. Of course, that will no longer be parking, so that's where we're filling different activities and more plantings.
Yeah, I was kind of looking at that switch, and it was like, does that mean they're done?
So overall, less parking, because people also park on that roadway that doesn't quite go through, but comes in both sides.
Well, but that's gone in your plan.
Yeah. So the proposal has less total parking than currently exists.
So that's a bit of a challenge for downtown, where we don't have enough current parking. Just FYI.
One thing to add to that, we are designing the parking lot we're thinking that we would do more than minimum requirement for accessible parking stalls, and then drop-off area.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just doing numbers in my head for when we have things downtown, and we seriously do not have enough parking. That's been exacerbated by the apartments.
One challenge here too is that we do have a lot of encumbered land with shoreline jurisdiction, with
Exactly.
all of the restoration to the south, and so reducing the impervious surfaces is also a big
Yeah.
need for the community as well.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where they're meeting in the middle.
Yeah, I'm catching that as I'm looking at this, but I still get to point it out. I guess I'm going to focus on our historic buildings, since I came on the board not too terribly long after Lytle House was remodeled to be the senior center. And my father-in-law, one of the reasons that we actually chose Bothell when we came home to the area in 1990 was because of the senior center there and the programs, because we needed them. And he very much enjoyed participating in them and being engaged until they got the new senior center across the river and et cetera. So I've seen the transition of the Lytle House to more community development oriented and classroom oriented, and then office oriented again. And now we're kind of back there. I'm going to put it this way. If we have the budget, we absolutely need to do the addition, the large addition. We need community spaces we can have classes. We need multi-purpose spaces, and this is one of the very few opportunities I see that we have the ability to put that in place. And no matter how big you build it, it is not going to be big enough. And that means 2 floors or 1 floor or otherwise. That's just a fact. And I've been dealing with that fact since we moved home in 90. And we just don't have it. We don't have enough playfields. We don't have enough community spaces. We certainly don't have enough pools, etc. I mean, it's just the facts of living in a growing community. That's one thing I want to say is we have to find the money to do that. The community really needs it. Adding it to the Lytle House like this, going back to the original, is wonderful and totally in keeping with getting us back to the standards that we like to apply to our historic buildings. So I really like that and would encourage that. Moving the Beckstrom cabin, as long as we get the remaining Beckstrom involved in working with it, and he is very knowledgeable, not just on the cabin, but in working with the buildings. I think it's a really good idea to move it and provide a better foundation, making, getting enough of a porch that we can at least facilitate people being able to look in. Full disclosure, my specialty in architecture is accessibility. I do not want to see this cabin door widened to make it accessible. It's just not part of the real total, how do I say it? It's not in the spirit of what accessibility guidelines are. There are places where we want to apply it. There are places where we just want to compromise and make it as best we can. I would also say that for the Hannon House doorway. And the schoolhouse doorway, I can't remember if it's 30 inches or not. I think it's a 30-inch, but I could be wrong, and it could be 28. I think we have a better chance there. And keeping in mind, that schoolhouse is used by the school district to take kids to. A lot. So, if we had one we would compromise, I think we could justify to the state that we compromised there. and for good reason. Yes, I'd love to see the Hannon House be made more accessible. I think that could be a real challenge other than getting up to the porch and getting the ramp in place, which would be wonderful. And some upgrades on it, yeah, the lighting, there's always things at Hannon House that need to be maintained. Back to the Lytle House, the restoration to remove the non-historic additions. Yeah, that would be great. It would be great to have the Hannon House back to as close as what it was when it was moved down there before it was remodeled. Keeping in that spirit that we want to try to have this quasi-historic district that recalls our founding. And I think we do it in a really good way. And it's frankly user-friendly, historic-friendly, and encourages people to think about historic preservation, which was the intent of the people who set it up and got the buildings moved down there in the first place, some of which are still alive, so they will be happy. Yeah, I think our biggest thing is then what can we do to incorporate our Native American historic elements? My first thoughts when I saw this was, well, we could do a longhouse as a Lytle addition. Then my next thought was, no, because we need more space than that. Because we do. At the same time, then I guess I'm going to look to your creativity beyond that the kayak rental space could look like a longhouse. But that longhouse needs to be
I got to interrupt.
available.
I'd be totally opposed to that.
Well, no, you haven't heard the rest of it. That longhouse needs to be available to people. Than the Native Americans and others. That's why it can't just be a token to be the kayak house or things like that. So it's almost got to be its own standalone element and be for that, very designed for that and dedicated to that. See, you had to wait till I finished.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I've been doing this too long.
I know, and I knew your spots. So, I think you guys did a great job, particularly with the limitations of the space down there, particularly and especially the limitations of the setbacks. It is no fun to do layouts with our shoreline restrictions, even though I have to admit there's very good reasons for it. And I appreciate, frankly, moving the cabin back a little bit from possible, flooding, getting it out of potential, getting a better positioning for it. But, yeah, wonderful job. And I'll look forward to seeing some more solutions and firming up of these design elements.
I just want to say thanks for the feedback. It's really great to get your opinions on this.
Nick had asked that we, give you some idea on the input on the other houses, and Vicki did a good job of that covering, I think. And I would agree with her on the Hannon House and the schoolhouse and the Beckstrom House in terms of I don't see anything proposed here that's looks too expensive for one thing, and isn't pretty reasonable. The little house, wow, there's a lot there in those proposals, and I just it seems like that's the single most expensive project on the property, and I have real concerns about whether it's worth that expense in terms of trying to expand it when maybe it would be cheaper to expand either somewhere else or I know there's been discussions about more of a community center being built in Bothell. So I don't know what the realistic and the time frame and short-term, long-term, interim kind of things, transitions and stuff. But I kind of hate to see us put the expense that I see at least going into the little house to salvage a little chunk of it that dates back to just the turn of the previous century. Because we've certainly lost other things, and sometimes the sacrifices. We're saving some very significant buildings there in that area. So that's at least where I'm at on it right now.
Yeah, so do any other board members have any questions, comments, or recommendations? My only comment I have is that I will say I was proud, still am proud, of the amount of community input that's been put into this whole project. That's really important to reach out. I know I took 2 of those surveys. The open houses were great too, that you had that. And yeah, I think that's my last comment. I'll ask one more time. Do we have any other questions, comments, or recommendations from any board members?
I just second your comments to end on a high note here too. It really is a marvelous project, and I think the focus on getting community input on it and the extent of that is admirable. Wonderful job.
Thank you. Well, if there are no, do the applicants have any follow-up questions to the board?
Could you, I guess, weigh in on whether or not you think actually lifting the Lytle House is too ostentatious of a gesture, or if it
Yes.
seems possible? No? That's a solid yes?
Yes.
Okay. So Victoria is a yes, and then Andrew Ray.
Do I think it's too ostentatious, too expensive,
A
too?
gesture, yeah. Well, just in the spirit of the Secretary of the Interior standards, in your mind, do you think that is, given the fact that it was brought to sight, that it had been altered to such an extent throughout its, history, that level of alteration in this context, do you think that's still too much, given the standards?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a tough question. Go ahead, Nick.
Just to put a little bit of planning context here as well, as Board Member Sompi was mentioning, we are dealing with the SMP, the Shoreline Management Program, and when dealing with the SMP, our most restrictive area of our city, we have limitations to how much modification we can make and how much new impact in building surfaces and things like that. So I'm not necessarily speaking to option 2 or 3 as my favorite, but just from that standpoint, lifting it does have the benefit of we're only impacting the already impacted area versus option 3 where we're building we're impacting more soil, more land within the SMP, within the buffer perhaps. Once again, I'm not saying that we're shooting either one of these down, but there is, once again, meeting in the middle, and there is pros and cons to both situations, is all I wanted to bring to light.
I'll make another comment then. So what you're proposing is that we lift the Lytle House, just like the houses that were put up on Lower Capitol Hill after they were removed from the Denny regrade. And then basically it was real interesting for many years. I'm trying to remember the last time I saw one or two of them down there. I think they're all gone now. But the ones that I used to look at, where you had a Queen Anne dollhouse on top of a essentially cinder block foundation, dolled up with a little brick.
I think what our imagine.
I hope you're looking for something a little better than
Yeah, the
this.
Caribbean will be a little nicer on, I think, what we're proposing. But yeah, I think the hope is really to have that volume, that like original
Yeah.
structure, and not just be an extrusion upward, really have it offset and have the addition really be noticeably aside from it.
Yeah.
So you really get the form of what that original building looked like.
So this might be premature, but what kind of square footage? I mean, you had a few numbers in there. Are you looking at, because in terms of office, that's not a lot of office or even open space for classrooms.
Yeah, so I think it was in the 4,000 range.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
for the ad, the total was 4,000 square feet, and then for
'Cause-
the lift, it was. Yeah.
yeah,
it was
see,
in that-
1,500 original, the addition, that, essentially a 1,200 square foot interior increase.
And as Nick mentioned as well, we'll likely go in front of the land use, we'll do a check-in with them to see what they would consider acceptable in terms of an
Yeah.
addition. If we
I
go
guess-
that route.
Can I just add?
Yeah, I know, but
Yeah.
I'm looking at the fact that we really need more than that in terms of square footage, but then you're impacting outside the box.
Yeah, the one thing I would say about this lift concept, for one, it's probably not more expensive than the addition. I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive, but
Yeah,
sometimes.
I know.
You're an architect, so.
Yeah,
But the other thing, the way the Hannon House sits right now, the entry with the porch is disconnected from the rest of the event space that goes on there, because you have to come up to the building. This ground floor, new space with appropriate materiality that we would hope looks good and compatible, has the ability to really be a space that opens up to the plaza on both sides, so it can serve really well in a variety of different functions. So that's we didn't want to get detailed on materials yet because it's just way too early, but if we were to move forward with something like this, we would be working closely in discussions on what's the appropriate materials that would be compatible.
I can see the arguments both ways. I still go back to the fact that we just need more spaces in the city for public events, public classrooms, safety meetings. What can I say?
I know that they've been in front of the Parks Board as well, and I'm sure that's a topic of conversation.
I'm
So
sure.
It's one of the many things that we're weighing.
I guess I would put it this way. Number 3, yes. Number 2, I get it. I understand the compromises. Number 1, no. I like the idea that we go back and re-preserve by the Secretary of Interior standards the Lytle House per what the intent was when it was moved. The intent changed when we were desperate to have space for the senior center and the senior daycare. And the building was repurposed accordingly.
Again, I'm going to qualify my statements by saying I'm not committed to the little house surviving. But one thing that occurred as Vicki was talking is the possibility of actually restoring the original as much as can be done and moving it to a location in greater proximity with the schoolhouse and the Hannon House and the cabin in a configuration that would be then because there is some chronological links in there in terms of starting with the cabin, schoolhouse, and the Hannon house, and then the little house. And then being able to build on that space that we've removed the little house from. Again, it's kind of, maybe you've got a lot of tight spaces there. I know you're working in a small area to try and satisfy all of these concerns. I guess I also don't kind of like, in terms of the lift, just the having a large two-story building in that space, because it seems like it's down by the river, and all of a sudden there's a McMansion there instead of this comfortable little space where people can move around, and there's recreation for different ages, and natural setting, and so.
It won't be maybe but a foot or two higher than Hannon House. Hannon House is 2.5 stories. Yeah. There's 2 stories with an attic. So. Very nice.
Well, yeah, I think that out of the 3 options, 3 is my favorite for the contemporary building with public functions. I like the idea of that. So I don't know. That's my input. So, do you have any other questions for us? First off, actually, Board Member Bajanoff, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I would agree that option 1 is probably the worst idea, in my opinion, today for a lighthouse. And I don't like the rendering of the option 3. I kind of would like to see something else to really give my opinion on what it would look like, because the rendering doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you. The applicants have any more questions for us?
I'm just curious. I think rightly there were concerns about the costs of options 2 and 3 in the context of the project. If the costs left us with option 1 or maybe option 4 being do nothing, would option 1 be a reasonable approach?
Are you asking me again or everybody?
Everyone.
That was
All of us.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll answer first. I would vote for leaving it as is.
Go ahead, Renee.
I guess I've really sorted out the option 1 would be to just alter the interior to fit as many city office spaces as possible while still providing community gathering space. Is that pretty much the extent of it?
I think with the city, we'd have to have a more detailed conversation of program. Like if we're working with the existing shell, essentially, is it really realistic for them to have office space in there and have a community meeting room? So there might be some choices we're making to, let's focus on this program more than the other. Can't fully answer that yet.
We've had some very, very preliminary discussions about option 1, about renovating the attic space and things like that. And we've already ran into potential building code issues with that. And would it meet the needs of the amount of staff space necessary? Probably not. So at least that's our preliminary approach of what we've looked at. And that's why they've really navigated through options 2 and 3 as more of a priority, at least from what they've heard from the other board and from the community, and as Board Member Sompi's mentioned, that the need for more space.
It sounds like to me like the option one isn't really probably practical, not necessarily from a landmarks preservation standpoint, but from other practical considerations. So that leaves us with just the leaving it as is option, I guess, which I don't know. It's a pretty good chunk of space there, so I guess I'm still on the incline that I'm not necessarily have to save the little house, well, what's left of it.
So in that other hypothetical scenario you were going over, Ray, where you basically strip it down to the original, move it alongside the other more historic buildings, you're imagining like more of a community-focused building in the place of where the Lytle is currently, like maybe even possibly a longhouse that we can invite the natives to, help us design and construct strictly for gathering?
Yeah, I don't know what other space would be available for a longhouse, but I wouldn't say necessarily that space, but but it would seem that would free up that space in terms of the shorelines board issues to build something else there. I don't want to say, where a longhouse should be or shouldn't be. I think that's a conversation with native peoples, indigenous peoples that want to have a connection here, that would like to build more of a connection here. And that might not be an appropriate space for it there.
Well, yeah, I think it's great. This seems like the right time to sort of ideate and, kind of come up with alternative solutions. And that's, I guess, one that we hadn't even really considered. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay. Yeah, well, with what the information Nick gave, it sounds like option one really wouldn't be a good option. So I guess that's my kind of, I don't know if I would do that one. So thank you for that information, Nick. I'll ask one more time. Are there any other questions for the board? Seeing none. Since there are no further questions from the applicant, I call this briefing to a close. Thank you very much for presenting this proposed project to the board this evening. Thank you all. Appreciate you.
Okay. So do we have anything else?
So next we have reports from staff. I see none on the agenda, but is that still accurate?
I was just going to mention we were able to acquire the Landmark Preservation Board plaques. So one of those will be being provided to the Ivy Graham House, our most recent newest landmark. So we'll be speaking with the owner of that historic landmark. And we'll be having a follow-up conversation with you guys about that, which is really exciting. And we actually ordered 2, so we have one on backup for any future landmarks that come through this board, which is really exciting. We're already planning for the future. And last but not least, we are still waiting for the budget to be adopted, and I'm hoping to provide you guys with an update when that happens. So hopefully we can start doing some programming of our own for this board for 2025. That's all.
That would be great.
Thank you for that, Nick.
I guess reports from members are up
sorry.
next, so
Yeah, sorry about that.
waiting.
Yeah, let me. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll go on to reports from members. Are there any items a board member wishes to discuss?
Do we have on our agenda a look at the downtown? What's it called? Sub-area plan.
Yeah.
That's being updated, I believe, over the next couple years, and I thought, maybe we can get on the ground floor of that too in terms of.
I can speak briefly to that. So I am aware that a part of the implementation of the comprehensive plan, one of the items of that is to update the downtown sub-area plan. To my knowledge, that will be kicking off at the beginning of next year, 2025. So very shortly, just around the corner. I am not a part of directly with the team working on that. I'll be more in a support role, so I apologize. I don't have all of the details and the timeline, but I do know that there are elements of the downtown plan, such as Park at Bothell Landing and the historic resources there, and the DSRA, which I know this board is very familiar with. and some of our other historic structures in downtown, and there's some specific code sections that even refer back to Title 22, which governs this board. So there will be some touch points at some point. I just do not know when. And I can find out and see if I can get a preliminary timeline on that. I think we're really just trying to get through comp plan, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Nick.
Are there any other items a board member would wish to discuss? See none. Would a board member like to make a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
Board Member Thomas moves to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Board Member Sampi seconds. We will go to a vote. Board Member Thomas.
Aye.
Board Member Babajanov.
Aye.
Myself, aye, and Board Member Sampi.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Recording stopped.